I also appreciate the fact that all of the books that I read this month, they'd take up more than an entire shelf. This isn't even all of the books that I read, but that's all. I read that all in July. How weird is that? Oh my god, I have no life. Okay, that's all. Samantha, so I apologize for this weird filming location. Today I'm doing my July and BookTube-A-Thon wrap up, and I just thought that this video was going to take me forever to film, and if I use my lights, which is like the only way that I can film over my bookshelf is if I use my lights, because that is the dingiest part of my room. If I use my lights, I'm gonna melt because they're really hot. So I decided to film over here today, and I hope that's okay. I know my desk is a mess. It's got clothes all over it because I just bought a whole bunch of stuff from Forever 21, and I'm thinking of doing a clothes haul. Is that something you'd want to see? Because I think all the clothes are really cute and I want to show them off. Let me know. So, in the month of July, I read a total of 15 books and one novella, so basically 16 books, which is crazy. So that's because the biannual BookTube-A-Thon was within the month of July, and so was the BookTube-A-Thon. I read about 4 books during the biannual BookTube-A-Thon, and then during the BookTube-A-Thon I read 7 books. So that's basically 11 books already out of the way. So I've only read 5 other books this month, but still that's fucking crazy. So the first book that I finished during the month of July was The Diviners by Libba Bray, and I actually listened to this one on audiobook. I gave this book a 4.5 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed it. I really wasn't expecting to because I am the biggest scaredy cat in the world, and going into it I knew that it was a little bit creepy, so I really thought I wasn't going to enjoy it, but I loved this book so much. It's a really long book. It's over 500 pages. So for a first book in a series, like, that's ridiculously long. It's actually completely worth it, and reading it, there's not a single bit that you want to cut out because it all just makes sense. None of it is dragging, none of it is unnecessary. It's all really important to the story. It is a little bit creepy, especially if you're listening to the audiobook. I would 100% recommend the audiobook because it's done so well. There's a song that the villain in this book sings, and you hear it sung, and it's just, oh, it's really good. Creepy though. Very creepy, and the song is really catchy. So I just found myself wandering around my house going, naughty John, does his work with his apron on. And I'm like, oh my god, Samantha, what are you doing? That's a song that's sung by a serial killer. But it is a fantastic book, and I would 100% recommend. I gave that one a 4.5 out of 5 stars. The next 3 books that I read, I've already talked about in my biannual BookTube-A-Thon wrap-up. So if you want to know my full thoughts on the books, I will link my biannual BookTube-A-Thon wrap-up down below. But I will just tell you what books I read during that week and what I gave them. So the first book that I finished during that week was The Crown by Kira Cass, and I gave this book a 4 out of 5 stars. Next, I finished reading The Shadowhunter's Codex by Cassandra Clare and Joshua Lewis, and I also gave this book a 4 out of 5 stars. I finally finished it. I started it in September of 2014. Just, you know, almost 2 years, but not quite. The last book that I read during the biannual BookTube-A-Thon was The Unexpected Everything by Morgan Matson, and I gave this book a 3.75 out of 5 stars. So I also read the majority of the next book during the biannual BookTube-A-Thon, but I hadn't actually finished it in time to talk about it in my wrap-up for that. So the next book that I read in the month of July was Lair of Dreams by Libba Bray. This is the second book in the Diviners series, and I did not enjoy this one as much as the first one. It still had the creepy factor, and it was a little bit creepier in some regards because a lot of it was to do with dreams, and a lot of people were getting this sleeping sickness. It was really weird and creepy to know what caused that, but at the same time I didn't love this one as much as I loved the first one, so I only gave that one a 3.75 out of 5 stars. It was still really good, do not get me wrong, it was still fantastic, but I just couldn't justify giving it a higher rating because there were some aspects which I didn't enjoy as much. So the next book that I read was actually the novella, and that was Into the Forest by Freedom Matthews. This is a prequel novella to Inherited by Freedom Matthews, and I got Inherited in my July fairy loot box, so I decided to buy the prequel novella because it was really cheap and I needed something to read while I was at school, and I don't like taking my books to school because I'm like ridiculous when it comes to ruining my books. They're precious. And I ended up giving that one a 3 out of 5 stars. It wasn't my favorite thing in the world, and so far, because I haven't read Inherited, I can't say that it was necessary for it. I don't know that, but at the moment it doesn't feel like it was a necessary thing. If you wanted to just read Inherited, I don't think you have to read the prequel, but if that's something you want to do, go ahead and do it, but I only gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read was More Happy Than Not by Adam Silvera. This book was so good. I started reading this during the biannual BookTube-A-Thon. I read this a little bit after the biannual BookTube-A-Thon, but one afternoon I sat down and I think I read about 200 pages of this because this twist happened, and I was like, holy shit. Okay, I just need to finish this book right now because it was so good. This story is amazing. I gave it a 4.5 out of 5 stars, but I 100% recommend this book. It is a fantastic debut. I cannot wait to read his next book. I forgot what it's called. I will read everything he writes because it was beautiful. The next book that I read is probably the best book I've read so far in 2016, and that is A Court of Mist and Fury by Sarah J. Maas. I started this book like quite soon after it arrived at my house, but that was in the middle of my exam, so I couldn't really read it at the time. And also, I don't like one of the characters in this book a lot, and he features a lot in the beginning of the book, but not so much later on. I'm trying not to spoil anything at all, so I'll just leave it at that. But this book was fantastic. If you didn't know, this book is the sequel to A Court of Thorns and Roses, which came out last year. And if you want to see my spoiler-free review of that, I'll link it down below for you to go and check it out to see what it's all about. But this is the sequel. This is an amazing book. For some strange reason, it is classified as young adult, but it is not young adult. If you are a young child of the age of like 14, don't, just steer clear. Wait another year or two and then read this series, because like, honestly, I mean, I know that if I read this at the age of 14, I would be scarred for life. But right now, I'm like, oh, this is great. That makes me sound like a pervert. I didn't mean it like that. Anyway, this book was fantastic. I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars. I cannot wait for the next book. I'm so happy that this is being turned into an 8-book series instead of a trilogy. I can't wait. But I fear for the characters, because if it was a 3-book series, then everything could get wrapped up quite nicely in the next book. But now I'm not sure what's gonna happen with that relationship, and I'm like, my babies. Don't do this to my babies. So the next 7 books that I read during the BookTube-A-Thon, and I filmed my wrap up for the BookTube-A-Thon right after it ended, so I'm just gonna insert the clips from that video, but I am actually combining the two because I don't want to talk about them again, because I already talked about them. So the first book that I managed to complete for the readathon was The Hunting of the Snark by Lewis Carroll. This completed so many different challenges actually, but I only used it to complete 2 of the challenges, which were reading a book that is older than you, because this was published in the 1800s, and also to read a book only after sunset, because I read this at about 1 in the morning on the very first day. And I gave this book a 3 out of 5 stars. It's actually a poem, and I hate poetry. I know that like that seems like such a closed-minded statement, but I'm really not into poetry at all. However, I did enjoy this. It was weird and quirky and a bit crazy, just like everything that Lewis Carroll wrote apparently. But it was a really short story, a really short little poem, went really quickly, and I'd suggest it maybe if you're into Lewis Carroll. The next book that I finished for the BookTube-A-Thon is actually an audiobook, and that was The Wrath and the Dawn by Renee Adier. This book was just a random book. I just used this book because I had a free Audible credit, so I was like, I'm just gonna use it. I'm gonna get this book because my friend recommended it to me like a million times. So I got it, listened to the audiobook, and that was just gonna complete the challenge of read 7 books. And my thoughts on this book. I gave this book a 2.5 out of 5 stars, which I know is an extremely unpopular opinion because some people I know of have just absolutely loved this book. I don't know if it's because I listened to the audiobook or if it's just that this story was not for me, but I think listening to the audiobook did also make me enjoy it even less because it was really confusing. The narrator wasn't very good at distinguishing the different character voices. She didn't do a different male voice or a different female voice for the 2 different female characters that were talking, and it was just really hard to follow. As well as that, I didn't find myself getting really latched onto the story, and I didn't feel any connection to the characters. I don't know, everyone always talks about how beautiful the writing was, and I really didn't notice it, but it's probably because I was listening to the audiobook version. So overall, it just wasn't my favorite thing. It wasn't the worst thing in the world, but I won't be continuing on with the sequel, so I only gave it a 2.5 out of 5 stars, and I'm really sorry if that's your favorite book in the world, but we're all entitled to our own opinion. That just happens to be mine. The next book that I read was Attachments by Rainbow Rowell. I read this book to complete the challenge of reading a book by your favorite author. I was originally going to read Summer Days and Summer Nights, but I started that and just couldn't continue. So I read Attachments, and I gave this book a 4 out of 5 stars. I'd say it's more of like a 4.5. I really enjoyed this book, but the reason I knocked it down a star was because it's a bit of a weird premise. If you don't know what this book is about, this book is about a guy called Lincoln who gets a job in IT security for this company, and he's like, okay, I don't really know what that's going to entail, but I'll sign up for it anyway. Turns out he has to read people's emails to make sure that they're not using any inappropriate words in their work emails or using their work email to send personal messages, because that wasn't allowed. This is set in the 90s, which is really cool, and also I just really enjoyed this book. Anyway, I really enjoyed this book. I did find it difficult to relate to Lincoln. I feel like he wasn't a very relatable character. I don't know, I just didn't feel myself getting attached to him, and also I feel like the whole premise is a little bit weird. He ends up reading the email conversation between 2 women, and he ends up actually falling in love with one of them somehow, even though he's never met her before. It's a really good story, a bit quirky. I really enjoyed it, and I gave it 4.5-ish out of 5 stars. The next book that I read was Me Before You by Jojo Moyes. I read this book to complete the challenge of reading a book and then watching the book to movie adaptation, because I did that on the day that I finished this book, and I gave this book a 3.5 out of 5 stars. This book was questionable. I don't know, I did enjoy it. I really liked the characters. I enjoyed the sort of chatty writing style in it. I think that it was different to explore the themes that went on in this book, but this book's kind of difficult to talk about without spoiling it because this book goes in a completely different direction than what you'd think, because I think a lot of people don't tell you what actually goes down in this book at all. They don't really mention anything to do with what happens, so it takes a bit of a weird turn. I think I knocked it down a bit because I feel like when someone tells you that a book is sad, it immediately sort of gives you some spoilers. So when everyone said this book is so sad, oh my god, you're gonna cry so much, I just feel like it was a bit of a spoiler. As well as that, I watched a review that was done by a man who has quadriplegia, and he was really criticizing it, and I think that, you know, if you're gonna take anybody's word for it of what it's like and living with it, then I think you take this gentleman's word for it over Jojo Moyes, who I don't think has had any experience with it. I don't want to put that out there because I don't know, I haven't done my research, but he pointed out that some of the terms she used don't actually exist. So I just found myself getting frustrated. Obviously after reading the book, I watched this review and thought I can't justify giving this book a higher rating because it wasn't done well. Anyway, on to brighter pastures. The next book that I read was Origin by Jennifer L. Armentrout. This is the 4th book in the Lux series, and this book was to complete the challenge of reading a book that you found through BookTube, because I would not have found the Lux series if it wasn't for BookTube, and I really enjoyed Origin. I'd say it's my 2nd favorite out of all the books. I give it a 5 out of 5 stars, and I just feel like so much happened, and I also feel like it was a really good idea for me because I took a break after reading the 3rd one because I really didn't like the 3rd one very much, so I took quite a long break before picking up the next one. And I feel like that's a really good way to do it, just because the 3rd one's very average and then you jump into the 4th one and you're like, oh my god. And it had a major cliffhanger. It was just really good, and I definitely suggest the Lux series if you haven't picked it up before. It's so good. Following on from that, I was getting towards the end of the readathon. I was only on my 5th book, and the 2 books that I was planning on reading, I was like, I can't. And this book arrived at my house during the readathon, and I was like, I just have to pick it up because, especially from the cliffhanger from the last book, and that was Opposition by Jennifer L. Armentrout, the 5th and final book in the Lux series. I ended up giving this book a 4.5 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed it. I loved how everything wrapped up, but at the same time, I had to knock it down a little bit just because there were things that were getting on my nerves by this point, like for example, her saying holy alien babies. That's not a saying, can you not? But it was a fun time. Don't get me wrong. I gave this book a 4.5 out of 5 stars. Definitely would recommend this series. And the 7th and final book that I read during the readathon was You Know Me Well by Nina LaCour and David Levithan. This book was to complete the challenge of reading a book with yellow on the cover, as well as reading 7 books, because this was my 7th book. And I gave this book a 4.5 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed this book. I thought it was fantastic. So much representation in this book, which is just great. Not so much in terms of race. You definitely get your fill of LGBTQ characters in this. If you don't know what this book is about 2 characters, Mark and Kate, who actually are in the same calculus class, but they never talk or anything like that. They've never spoken before, and they both end up meeting each other in a gay nightclub one day and just start hanging out and become really good friends. And I think I loved this book so much because it's a lot about friendship. It does have very romancy aspects to it, but there's a lot about friendship and developing friendships and friendships falling apart and stuff like that. I just feel like it was a really good book. It was really well done. I feel like a lot of the times in books, there's always something going wrong for the gay characters, like their parents don't accept them, or their relationship is doomed because one of them's being an idiot and trying to make the other one not immortal anymore. Not naming any names, but Alec, what are you doing with your life? It didn't talk about those things, which, yes, those issues are so important to talk about, but it is kind of refreshing to have a book where it's just a thing. They're just gay and lesbian, and it's fine. It's just fine. They just get on with it, and I really liked that about this story. I definitely need to read some more LGBT books. I just need them in my life. So if you have any recommendations, feel free to reference them down below for me so I can go and check them out. So these were the 7 books that I read during the readathon. I managed to read a total of 2,260 pages in a week, which is pretty crazy. Let me know how you guys did in the BookTube-A-Thon. So the last book that I read during the month of July, this is number 16. Book number 16. Just thought I'd clarify that again, that's a crazy amount. So the last book that I read was Vicious by V.E. Schwab. I'm going to a Victoria Schwab event next week, and so I decided that I finally had to pick up the rest of the books that I own by her. I read A Darker Shade of Magic last year and fell in love with it. So last year after reading that, I picked up Vicious, and I never read it. So it's been sitting on my shelf for about a year, but I finally picked it up, and this book is amazing. This book is so interesting because the characters in this are not good. They're not good characters, as in they don't have good morals. They're sort of villainous is so weird and complex and interesting because it's really difficult to like the characters because of their actions, but at the same time you're rooting for them because they are the lesser of two evils. So if you didn't know, this book is about two guys called Victor and Eli. When they're in their senior year of university, they have to do a thesis, and Eli decides to do his thesis on EOs, or extraordinaries, which are people who have special powers, and they start to research into how EOs can be made, and from this they decide that maybe they're actually going to test it out on themselves. This book takes place 10 years later after that has happened, and Victor wants to get revenge on Eli because Victor actually ended up in prison because of something that happened 10 years ago. Victor is out of prison and he wants to get revenge on Eli. It's weird but so good, such a good story. This book is an adult book, but it's not because it has adult themes, I wouldn't say. There is a bit of violence in this book and also a bit of swearing, but I would definitely suggest this book to anyone who's okay with those two things. I would suggest it to anyone. As I said, it's so good, so interesting, and it really makes you think. So I would pick it up if I were you. So in terms of my TBR challenge for May was to read a book that was set in my country, and I forgot to do that for ages. But it turns out that Me Before You finally completed that challenge because this is set somewhere in England. I can't remember where. I don't know if it was ever mentioned, but it's in like a small town in England. So that finally completed my May TBR challenge. And my TBR challenge for July was to read a book over 600 pages, and I did that twice because I read Lair of Dreams, which is 640 pages or something like that, and I also read A Court of Mist and Fury, which is over 600 pages. So I'm all caught up on my TBR jar challenge. That reminds me, I need to choose out of there. Time to choose out of my TBR jar for August. Can't believe it's August tomorrow. That's craziness. My TBR jar challenge for August is to read a book that I can finish in a day. So I think technically I could finish like practically any book in a day, but I think that I really meant to say finish a book in a day. So I will attempt to do that with one of the books that I own. So these are all the books that I read in the month of July. Not even all of them because I listened to some of them on audiobook. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, please give it a thumbs up. If you're new here, feel free to subscribe down below, and I'll see you all very soon with another video. Bye!